Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 8 of Culture Conversations, brought to you by Polaris Praxis. I'm your co-host, George Holman.
And I'm the other one, Macdara.
So, Macdara, what are we going to be talking about today?
So this week, George, this is something that's been in the news this week and something we've been discussing a lot with clients over the last few weeks. And it is about changing the culture in an organization. So how to change the culture and how to make that stick.
Okay. And I think part of what we're going to be talking about, right, is around beliefs, behaviors, how that helps to determine how a company's employees and management interact, looking at, making sure that things aren't just written in handbooks and on the wall, that people actually believe what is being said and they're able to then enact that into ways of working, figuring out if there's any, gaps in values versus lived experience that might lead to drift over time. And then a little bit around that kind of leadership tone, when leadership changes or when actions shift, typically culture needs to follow with it, but it's about being deliberate with that.
Yeah.
So, Macdara, you mentioned two kind of examples that have been in the news. Do you want to talk a little bit about those for everyone who may not have seen them?
Yeah, so the two examples are one for St. James's Place, who's a fairly well-known financial advisory firm, and the other is the BBC, which, again, fairly well-known. I think that they were having issues in behaviour, and some of that was fairly public. Those are the two examples that we have. So maybe we'll do a quick recap of those. So the St. James's Place was around, one of the changes they've brought in is how they compensate their advisors. So really trying to change the incentives, the fee structure, and the recognition that they have within the organization. They've also they had like these kind of big boozy offsite things, every year. So they've cancelled that as well. So really trying to align the way that they are rewarding their staff more in line with the kind of behaviors that they want to see from those employees. So it's really using their governance and reward frameworks to evolve the behavior of the organization and have that aligned and basically making sure that the two things are working together and not, against each other.
And there's probably that element there, Macdara, that if your reward and recognition and performance systems are looking at measuring the wrong things and rewarding the wrong things, the culture will follow with them, right? People will be more drawn towards the things that might not be getting called out as, being anti-cultural or misaligned with values.
Yeah, and look, that which is rewarded is replicated. So people, when they see behavior is being rewarded, they're going to do the same, right? So you need to be able to challenge that and demonstrate that that the right behaviors are what are actually being rewarded. The other one then is the BBC had, in April of this year, they launched a kind of investigation or a process around their culture. So they brought in a company called Change Associates who conducted a review of the organization and made a number of findings around the company. They looked at, fear of speaking up, inconsistent management, pockets of toxicity within the organization. They concluded that, the organization wasn't toxic, but that there were pockets of toxicity, there were pockets of unacceptable behavior, and that really needed to be addressed. So they obviously came up with a number of recommendations. I'm sure if we all had to guess what they were, you could do that right around forums and reporting and accountability and all the rest of it. So that's out there, but it just shows you, I guess, this can happen in any organization. The bigger the organization or the small, no matter how small, it can go right across the board. And that BBC one was a very public example, but that's an interesting one if people want to, obviously read further on it around how they've gone about it, what those findings were, and some of the actions and steps that they're taking to address that.
And And it really strikes me, Macdara, that we've spoken about two relatively large organisations. You quite rightly said, this can exist in any size of organisation. But two of the things you mentioned there that we've spoken about in the past, including on this podcast, is around psychological safety and where that has to be a cornerstone of a healthy culture. People need to feel safe psychologically to be able to speak up and provide that challenge. But then also what strikes me is around culture can really start to erode when what's said and what's done don't match. And where there's that delta or that mismatch between what is being said, again, what's being written on the walls, what's been put in the handbooks, doesn't match people's lived experience day to day.
Yeah, 100%. And it's that alignment, isn't it, that throws people off and causes frustrations within the organizations where people aren't holding themselves up to the standards that they've said and what they're saying the organization does, and that's can be a real driver of disengagement and lack of motivation for the entire organization.
Yeah, and I guess, do you want to share maybe an example from your professional background where you've seen this, where you've been involved with addressing this?
Yeah, quite a few times, I've gone into management roles where I've had to change things for lots of different reasons. So, some of it is around, a lot of the work that I've done in the past is from an operations perspective. So sometimes that is where the discipline in the organization has fallen away, often through workload. So we've all seen this where everyone's super busy. Maybe you're a client-facing team or organization. You've got businesses busy. You've got a lot of day-to-day coming in, queries to deal with, and some of that, for want of a better word, boring stuff, it just slowly gets left behind. But that will start to kill the organization over time, because it's going to start creating that drag. So in one example, we carved out a small team and really started addressing some of those pieces of work that needed to be done, and really gave it the right level of focus and attention and resourcing to do that. And what was interesting there was, within a relatively short time, it was under control, and we were able to disband that team and move that work back across the broader team once it had been rectified. So that also required that change in mindset across the broader team to understand the value of that work and how important it would be. I've also had examples where really teams have ended up quite isolated, maybe from the management structure, and kind of become a bit of the Wild West, where behaviors are way out of whack with where they should be in terms of standards, and totally misaligned from the organization in terms of what's acceptable in terms for communication, how people are being dealt with and treated, and that can it can be kind of shocking in terms of sometimes having to get into very simple lessons for teams to sit down and say, okay, guys, this is what's acceptable, this is what isn't, and living that and embedding that and demonstrating how that should happen and how everyone should work together and communicate in a professional environment. So I've had to, so they're kind of two quite different examples, but both challenging nonetheless. How about you?
So one strikes me straight away, and it's, I think, a slightly more technical example, but it's still very culture related. And it was an organization that I joined. The part of the reason for me joining was around establishing a risk culture. But what was being said and what was being done didn't match. There was a disconnect between words and actions. And further to that, the necessary time wasn't being put into creating the right structures. And for me, culture that's practiced but unsupported by systems, by proper process, is unsustainable. You leave yourself open to that cultural drift, that inability to make things stick. So part of what I looked at was actually making not just change, but enduring change. So putting systems and processes in place that had checks and balances as
Mm.
well, that moved the risk culture from being present but fragile through to being present, sustainable, and worked for the greater good around governance, around oversight, and around, leadership having that trust in the risk culture that we've developed.
Yeah, which is super important because when that initiative ends, you need it to be sustained and embedded, right? And to continue when it's not just the hot topic.
That's right. So we talk a lot about our model for not just developing culture, but also making sure that it sticks on the point that you've just noted. Is it worth us just going through that initially overall and then diving into a bit of the detail?
Yeah, so we are going to share a framework that is a way to think about this. And if you have a similar challenge in your organization, a way to help you to start thinking about making this change. And that is the LIFT framework. Another acronym, George, always a favorite of mine. And the LIFT framework is about leadership, impact, focus, and trust. So they're the kind of 4 areas we're going to look at if you have this kind of a challenge in your team or department, organization, whatever it might be. That's how we're going to look at it.
Okay. Shall I take L?
Go for it.
Okay. So leadership. Now, a lot of people, when they hear the term leadership, they probably think people in charge. And certainly there is something here around change starting from the top. I would view this slightly differently, though, and I think it is that leaders set the tone for culture. So your decisions, your interactions, your actions signal what is truly valued in the business and across the organization. So leaders themselves, I think it's quite fundamental that they're bought into the culture and any shift that is needed to be made, that they believe in what is being spoken about, but they believe what the not just the destination, but also the journey is, and they role model that, right?
Mhm.
Because I think we've probably seen it in our backgrounds. Many viewers and listeners probably have that culture. You struggle to make it stick if leaders themselves don't model the desired behaviors consistently, right? So
Yeah.
for us, when we think about leadership, it's not just management and top down forcing a message through the organization. It's about living and believing in this culture and the change that you want to try and make. And it can never just be a communication exercise. I think we've probably all seen it where, you go into an office on a Monday morning and they've had, some branding people in that have put some new words on the wall. That becomes very superficial. It becomes almost a bit countercultural because people feel it's being done to them rather than with them. So it's much more than a communication exercise. It's much more around building the values with the team, building those cultural aspects with the team, and then living and breathing those things that you're trying to put into action. And typically for us, when senior teams lead both visibly and consistently, the organization follows, right? So to reiterate, I think probably the main points I would have under leadership, it would be it's an act, not just a communication strategy, but also it's about believing in the things that we're trying to put in place, because that's the way that ultimately I think you're going to find your workforce is going to buy in to the change. Macdara, have I missed anything?
No, that's it. And it comes from the top, and that's what the organization will follow, as you say. So, if you do need to undertake this type of work or initiative, getting that alignment in that leadership team is critical before going out to the wider organization, making sure you have that conversation with them. Everybody's clear around what is acceptable, what isn't, how you're going to run this change, so that it doesn't get picked apart or fragmented then as it goes out to the wider organization. But yeah, absolutely agree with all of that.
Do you want to take impact?
Let's do that. So impact is about making the change real in the organization, that you are making it go beyond glib statements and PowerPoint presentations and town halls and chats, that it is about that lived experience, right? That people are starting to see it happen in how decisions are being made, how feedback is being given, who's being rewarded and recognized, what behaviors are being rewarded and recognized, and how is everyone within the organization being treated. So it needs to be super clear. And when we go into organizations, you can see this straight away. Right? You can get a sense of the culture in an organization very, very quickly around how people interact, how they behave in meetings, when you chat to people. It is very, very easy to sense this and get a feel for it. So if you can do that, if people can do that when you step in somewhere, you can even do it when you go to a meeting with somebody or a client, or you just walk around a place very briefly. So making sure that that's going throughout all of those different parts of the organization, all of those day-to-day elements of a business, that it really is kicking through and going beyond the superficial and is being lived by everybody, all the time.
And I think I would just build on that with, I think a lot of the time we can get very hung up on impact being viewed as something big and grandiose, and it has to be, grandstanding. But actually, impact is built through the choices we make every single day as leaders. Small things like how feedback is given, how decisions are made. And I think ultimately you'll realize as leaders, when you're starting to see impact being successful, culture will be viewed just as the way we do things here. So that's just what we do, as opposed to something that needs kind of deliberate change. It will become part of the tapestry. And that's when impact has probably reached the right point where you can reflect on it positively.
Yeah, exactly. It's just how we run this organization, not, oh, let me think, what's the culture again? Oh, how am I supposed to behave here? And what am I supposed to do? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Excellent. So we've done leadership, we've done impact. Next we have focus. George, you want to take us through that one?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you and I both come from a background working in ops in investment banking, right? And we've both worked the long days. We've felt the pressure of having 101 other things that we need to look at as leaders. Where we talk about focus, what we are essentially saying here is that it's about reinforcement of change. So you have 101 other things to do. When culture isn't actively and deliberately maintained, it slowly erodes and reverts. So, we talk a lot around culture being a focus for us. It should be a focus for leaders, and how they should kind of sharpen that focus, not just for themselves, but also across their teams, is through a number of ways, right? It's having it front and center. It's having it of, importance relative to other priorities, reinforcing it through active governance, reinforcing it through recognition, and also those rituals. So, the way we do things on a day-to-day basis, again, going back to that analogy, that ensuring that focus in the small things that we do on a daily basis, it doesn't just have to be the large things that we're trying to change. And that's where, we talk around trying to shift again the mindset from being in development mode or launch mode into we're living this, it's live. So we have a culture, we may want to change it, we may want to do things, giving it the necessary attention, but then also viewing it as a BAU thing that we stick to helps to prevent that, or kind of stop that risk of the positive change we're making from reverting and eroding because it loses focus over time.
Yeah, and we hear a lot around some of the people, culture, leadership stuff is, well, how would we measure that, right? And all organizations have metrics and numbers around, revenue and profit margin and all of these things, but there are absolutely metrics that you can use and measure to look at culture within an organization. And it's really important that they get that same focus and attention and are presented in these forums so that everybody knows this isn't going away. You need to spend time on it. You need to really live it and breathe it and bring it through and improve it, and sustain that, where it is in bad shape, that you're uplifting it and continuing that, or where it's going well, that everyone knows that that needs to be continued and puts that focus and effort into it.
Yeah. And then the final letter of the acronym is T for trust. Do you want to take that one, Madara?
Yeah, this is about, like all trust, it needs to be earned, and everybody needs to see that you're going to do what you say you're going to do, and that you are going to really live this proposal or whatever it is you're going to kind of launch to the organization. So if people inside the organization can start to see that change, they will be bought in. If they can see, okay, the leadership of the organization are telling us we need to do this, they're going to try and make these improvements, they're going to work on this, the leadership are acting in alignment with that, other teams are starting to work in alignment with that, we can see that we're treating each other differently in this perhaps new way, or we're dealing with our customers in this new way, or I can see that different behaviors within the organization are now being rewarded in a positive way, and those less than ideal behaviors are being dealt with and certainly are not being rewarded anymore. That trust will build and follow, and as that permeates through the organization, that can really change the reputation of the business, different teams, the entire organization. So that trust element is really essential to driving these type of initiatives and making sure that everyone's bought in.
Okay, so
Anything? Yeah, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, like, if we summarize the lift framework, so leadership, impact, focus, and trust, and I think what we're going to do is, over the course of the next few weeks, we'll share some more information on this framework, and we'll look to provide that to people so that they can adapt this for their own organization. For us, we're really keen to have the conversation around how we can help organizations with culture and behavioral change.
Mm-hmm.
Just because we're proposing a framework doesn't mean it has to be square peg round hole. A lot of the time it's about taking what works, leaving aside what doesn't, but ensuring that you've got those right conditions for success, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We'd love to help people make that change within their organization, and also it'd be great to hear from folks. So we've mentioned this before, but if people have anything within their organization where they think they would need this framework, or even just to let us know if there are some behaviors or systemic issues in your business holding you back and holding the culture back, let us know. Or even to know from people, okay, actually, yeah, having listened to the pod, this is the one step actually that I'm going to take this week or this month to really start to change it, because yeah, you've kind of bit of a light bulb moment has gone off there, and actually this is a great thing that I'm going to take into the organization. So we'd love to hear from folks on any of those.
Yep. And look, I think to bring this to life a little bit, we had a conversation this morning, right, with a client contact of ours who we're working very closely with on a culture change initiative. Obviously, not to get into the details, but this is very much an example for us of where we're able to apply theory and framework, which is great and it helps. And I think it's an accelerator, but it's about taking what will work for an organization, the elements that can really make a difference. And we're actually working with this client to now put in place change and help them with the right way of measuring the success of that change as well. Because clearly, if there's going to be a period of change and evolution, what senior leadership want to see is a return on the investment they might be making. So again, it's having that ability to show impact, to go back to the model, and do that in a disciplined way. And that's something that we're supporting at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, it's going to be different in every organization. And it's about really getting under the bonnet, having a proper look of what's going to work there and what people will respond to and what you're trying to do in terms of the values and behaviors you want to really bring forward and improve. But yeah, it's required in so many different areas. And, if you've got even, from a change perspective, where we've talked to lots of organizations about doing big projects and getting everyone bought in to bringing that change forward and being effective, that is also important. And you look at how dynamic AI is in so many industries at the moment. That can also be an area where changing that culture around embracing technology, embracing change, and showing a path forward for employees is also very key at the moment.
Yeah, agreed. So I guess moving to kind of closing remarks, if you will. In summary, Macdara, what would be your key takeaways from what we've discussed here? And if you had to suggest one thing that someone could take away from this episode and try for themselves, what would it be?
The key takeaway is it's a process, and there won't be any quick fix to this. Behaviors are formed over a long time, and trying to change something like that isn't something that you're going to do very quickly. A good starting point, like a lot of conversations about being honest with the organization and maybe within your own team, just having a fairly open conversation around where everyone thinks they are on this topic. So to maybe just gently introduce it in a team meeting and say, I've just been thinking about this recently around how we behave around X topic or how we do this. What do you all think? And to get a sense of maybe where you're on that line and versus where you want to be within your team, and to gently tease out some of their views on it. It could be a surprising conversation in a good way or a bad way. Maybe people might be way off where you want them to be, or actually there is a desire to and an acknowledgement that actually there is a problem, and that there's more buy-in than you maybe suspected there was. So I would say, be patient, and maybe just try a bit of a temperature check with your team.
Okay. For me, I would say you've got that element of designing for change. So, I think it's important to have the systems and the behaviors in place. And it's when you have that structure, but also that human element, that you're more likely to be successful. One without the other is probably going to be fragile change, and you're going to see that drift over time, particularly in busy organizations where, you have 101 other things going on. And that is probably part of what I would suggest as a key takeaway for anyone who's kind of tuned in is culture's not static, right? It is constantly evolving, both at a franchise level, at a department level, a team level, and an individual level. And it's about having the right systems and processes in place that work now, but are also designed to work in the future and can adapt over time so they don't get left behind.
Yeah. And how are you staying on top of that within your organization to understand maybe you've done something like this recently, but you feel like it's slipping? So how are you ensuring that you have that temperature check going on constantly? And is your process and the systems you've put in place to keep it going working, and ensuring that happens?
Yeah. great. So we've covered a lot of ground, right? And we will absolutely share the lift methodology. We'll share that on LinkedIn over the next week or so. As ever, we want to thank everyone for tuning in. We hope this was helpful and insightful. We are really keen to have your feedback. So if there's anything you think we're doing well, badly, you want us to talk about, please let us know. And also, if we can just ask one small favor of everyone, it's that you subscribe and like and follow the podcast and repost it and all of those good things. It does really help us.
Absolutely.
Cool. So with that, I'll say goodbye from him.
And goodbye from him.